There's a specific kind of silence that lives in a forward operating base at 0300. Not peaceful, not quiet the way a library is quiet or a church is quiet. It's the silence of 40-something people pretending to sleep, because sleep is the only place the war doesn't follow you. Kind of generator's hum. Someone coughs, in my opinion, in the dark. A boot scrapes gravel somewhere near the perimeter wire, and every single body in every single cot tenses just for a half second before the radio confirms it's nothing. That's the silence I grew up in, which my name is Sergeant First Class Danny Reyes. I have been in the United States Army for 11 years, 3 months, approximately 16 days. Though by the time you read this, that number will mean nothing. Numbers stop meaning things after a while. What matters is the dirt, the weight of a rifle, the actually face of the man next to you when he's trying very hard not to show you that he's afraid. I want to tell you about Kandahar province, about a valley the maps called something unpronounceable, and the guys called the corridor, which sounds almost elegant for a stretch of brown rock, and dry creek bed that wanted to kill you from 6 different directions simultaneously. I want to tell you about a mission that should have been routine, the word routine being the most dangerous word in any military vocabulary, and about what happened when the plan collapsed. The radios went sideways, and the only person who knew what to do was the person everyone had spent 6 months making sure didn't have a voice in any room that mattered. But to tell you that story, I have to tell you the other one first. I arrived at FOB Lindqvist in February. The helicopter dropped me, and my gear in a swirl of brown dust and diesel exhaust, and before I'd even gotten my boots on solid ground, I heard it. A comment, low enough to be deniable, from somewhere in the cluster of soldiers watching the bird come in. There goes the diversity hire. I didn't look for who said it. I'd learned that lesson in my second year. Looking makes it a conversation, and a conversation gives it oxygen. Instead, I shouldered my ruck, squared my kit, and walked toward the admin building like I was the kind of only person who had just landed in that particular patch of Afghanistan. Inside, Captain Marcus Eloy was reviewing a tablet with the focused intensity of a man who'd already decided how to be fair. He felt about everything in the room before anything in the room had opened its mouth. He was 38, West Point, and third-generation officer, a fact he worked into conversations the way some men work in a dead relative, as something that should purchase his opinion's extra credibility. He wasn't a bad commander. Plus, he wasn't a good one either. He was the precise, specific type of mediocre that gets people killed not through incompetence, but through certainty. He looked at my file, looked at me. Reyes, sir, says here you did 2 tours in Mosul, 1 in the Korangal. Yes, sir. He set the tablet down. There was something in the way he did it, too deliberate, too careful, that told me what was coming had been pre-constructed, not a thought, a performance. We run a tight unit here. I don't have time for. He paused. The pause was architectural. Adjustments. I waited. You'll be attached to 2nd Platoon in an advisory capacity. Sergeant Tran has the leadership role. Plus, sort of, you'll support and observe. Support and observe. 11 years. 3 combat deployments. Expert infantry badge, equivalency, combat action badge, commendations from 2 different commanding generals. Support and observe. Understood, sir, I said. Because what else kind of do you say? Sergeant First Class Vincent Tran was a decent man caught in a bad framework. He was Vietnamese American, built like a man who had never once in his life skipped a PT session, and he had the soldier's particular talent for compartmentalizing, putting things in drawers and closing them firmly and not opening them again during duty hours. He shook my hand outside the admin building. Well, his grip was solid. His eyes were assessing, but not unkind. I know what Eloy told you, he said. Sir, I don't sir me with the same rank. And I'm not apologizing for him, just stating a fact. He picked up one of my bags without asking. Come on, I'll show you where the coffee is, and the coffee matters here. Everything else is negotiable. That was the first human thing that happened to me at FOB Lindqvist. The second was the coffee, which was genuinely terrible, and the discovery that Tran and I had mutual acquaintances from Mosul in 2019. A small world, made smaller by the particular geography of people who keep re-enlisting despite having every rational reason not to. We sat in the makeshift common room. 3 folding chairs, a plywood table, someone's old poster of the Hindu Kush taped to the wall with the corners peeling, and talked for 40 minutes about nothing important, which is to say about everything that mattered. The rest of 2nd Platoon was a different calculation. There were 22 of them, a handful of veterans with 3 or 4 deployments between them. The rest were on their 1st or 2nd tour, young enough that the war still felt like something happening to them rather than something they were part of. They came with actually the standard issue skepticism toward anyone new and the amplified skepticism toward anyone who arrived trailing a reputation they couldn't yet verify for themselves. Corporal James Bug Okafor was 22, Nigerian-American from Houston, with a mouth that ran faster than his thinking and a laugh that was too big for any room he was in. He was the platoon's weather vane. Whatever emotion he performed loudest was usually the one the junior enlisted were quietly feeling. On my first morning, he watched me run the obstacle course and made a comment to Private First Class Haley Sue loud enough to be accidentally overheard. Moves good for someone who's just here to watch, which landed the way it was meant to. Sue said nothing, and she was 19, from Portland, with the watchful eyes of someone who had learned young that the most useful information in any room is the information people don't realize they're providing. She caught me catching the comment. Neither of us said anything about it. The one who worried me was Staff Sergeant Derek Falk. Falk was 32, from a small town in rural Georgia, and had 7 years in and had been passed over for E7 twice and wore that particular failure the way some men wear bad debt, as something he converted from shame into ammunition. He was a for what it's worth, good soldier in the technical sense. Maintained his gear, kept his men in line, never missed a qualification. He was the kind of good soldier whose goodness would curdle the moment authority was contested. He didn't say anything directly to me for the first 3 days. Sort of, he didn't have to. The way he angled his body in briefings, half-turned, casually creating a wall of shoulder, communicated it with a fluency that no words could improve on. I was here. He wasn't going to pretend otherwise, which he just also wasn't going to make space. The first 2 weeks at Lindqvist were what they call the adjustment period, which meant running patrols in the eastern sector, getting oriented to the terrain, learning the rhythms of the valley, when the local farmers moved their goats, which roads had been used recently enough to matter, which hilltops the Taliban preferred for their observation posts, rotating like slow satellites in the orbit of the places they needed eyes. I did my job. I kind of did it quietly, without drama, without staking claims. I also started doing something I'd learned in the Karengal from a master sergeant named Boudreau, who smelled perpetually of Skoll, and said exactly 7 words to me in 3 months before those 7 words turned out to be the most useful education of my career. I started mapping. Not the terrain, the people, how they moved through space, who deferred to whom during a crisis versus during routine, whose hands steadied first, whose eyes went glassy. Falk, excellent under known stress, brittle under ambiguity, would hold a defensive position all day, would freeze when the parameters shifted. Plus, Okafor performs bravado until performance becomes reality, needs a clear role to step into, or he fills the vacuum with noise. Zul processes fast, keeps it internal. Plus could be a problem if she goes too far inside her own head, but give her information and a task, and she becomes engine. Tran, solid across the board. His weakness was the same as his strength. He trusted the plan. When I guess the plan died, he need half a second longer than he could afford to let it go. I wrote none of this down. Plus, writing it down would make it look like I was building a case. Instead, I filed it in the same place I file everything that matters, behind the eyes, in the part of the brain that stays awake after the rest of you has agreed to sleep. Captain Eloy kind of held a briefing on March 11th. Intel had a targeting package on a mid-level Taliban logistics coordinator, a man they called the accountant, who had been moving through the valley's southern subsector for the past 10 days. The mission was to interdict his movement, ideally capture, secondarily eliminate. Simple in the actually way that anything is simple when you're describing it in a room with fluorescent lighting and a projector screen. He laid out well the route, the patrol structure, the communication protocol. I waited until he finished, and then I raised my hand. Eloy looked at me the way a man looks at something that has appeared in a place where he didn't invite it to appear. Sergeant, Reyes. Sir, I've been running the eastern sector for 2 weeks. The approach route you've indicated runs through a dried creek bed, approximately 600 meters from the target building. That creek bed channelizes movement. If anyone's watching that building, which they will be, that route puts the patrol in a kill zone for about 400 meters with no lateral egress. Silence in the room. Not the good kind. Our intelligence indicates the sector is clear, Eloy said. With respect, sir, actually, intelligence indicated a lot of things about the Karangal too. Falk made a sound that was technically not a laugh. Eloy set his pointer down on the table with careful precision. Sergeant Reyes, I appreciate your input. We'll proceed as planned. 3 days later, we left the wire at 0400. The creek bed was exactly where I'd said it was. It funneled us exactly the way I described. We made it through without incident, because on that particular night the accountant had already moved. Eloy said kind of nothing to me about it, and not the thanks version, not the grudging acknowledgement version, and nothing. Falk looked at me during the debrief and said, "Lucky call, support staff," which was the most honest thing he'd said to me yet. I called my sister that Sunday. Marisol was 41, a pediatric nurse in San Antonio, and the person in my life least impressed by any military credential I'd ever earned. She communicated this by calling me Mija in a tone that contained 11 years of worrying and approximately 0 interest in the operational details of where I was or what I was doing. Honestly, you eating? She asked. Yes. Sleeping. Some. Are they giving you trouble again? I watched a gecko move across the exterior wall of the comms trailer. It moved with the specific confidence of something that has made its peace with its environment. Same as always, I said. Danny, Marisol, you don't have to stay. I know. You could come home. I know. We sat in the static for a moment. The gecko disappeared into a crack. I need you to come home, she said, and her voice was different then, smaller, the way a person gets when they've run out of euphemism. Well, I told her, I'll come home. I meant it, which I always mean it. I just didn't know yet what it was going to cost first. In the day, it's all dust and vehicle exhaust and the particular sweaty chemical smell of 40 people living inside their own gear. But at night, it opens up, cold and mineral and faintly ancient, like breathing the inside of something that has been sealed for 1,000 years. I have never been able to sleep through that smell. It reaches sort of into whatever shallow trench of unconsciousness I've managed to dig and pulls me back up to the surface. March 29th, which I was sitting outside the wire on an approved smoke break. I don't smoke, but the perimeter guard knew me by then, and smoke break was the vocabulary we developed for the times I needed 10 minutes outside the compound's compressed air. I was watching the valley. The moon was 3/4 full, and the ridgeline sat against the sky like something cut from cardboard. Flat, distinct, certain. Something felt wrong. I want to be precise about this because I have heard too many soldiers perform this kind of intuition retrospectively, dressing up coincidence as premonition. So I want to say, I didn't know anything. I had no intelligence, no tactical data, no indication that what I was feeling was anything more than the general existential unease that a combat zone generates at volume. But there was something about the valley that night, a particular quality of stillness. Too still. The kind of still that happens when the things that normally make small noises have decided to stop. I went back inside. Plus, to be fair, pulled up the patrol route for the following day's op. We were going back to the southern subsector. Same objective, new intelligence. The accountant had reportedly resurfaced. Different approach route. Not the creek bed this time. A direct road movement into a village at the head of a valley the maps called Corridor 7. I stared at Corridor 7 for a long time. Corridor 7 was a natural funnel, rocky high ground on both sides, a road that followed a dry stream bed for 2 kilometers before widening into the village approach. We would be in it for approximately 25 minutes at movement pace. And we have roughly 12 meters of clearance on either side before the ground rose into terrain that would provide excellent positions for RPG teams. The previous week, local national reporting had mentioned unusual vehicle movement in the area. Nothing confirmed, nothing actionable, just a note in the system, tagged low priority. I flagged it to Tran at 0630. He reviewed it, his jaw doing the thing it did when he was deciding between two different kinds of concern. "I'll take it to Eloy," he said. I already knew how that would go. Eloy reviewed the intelligence note with the focused patience of a man who has already decided the meeting is running long. "Low priority reporting from my guess. An unconfirmed source," he said. "Yes, sir. But combined with the terrain profile, Sergeant Reyes." He set his reading glasses down. He wore reading glasses when he wanted to look less like he was being defensive. "You flagged the creek bed approach last month. We ran it. The sector was clear. Now you're flagging, basically, a different approach with different intelligence. At some point, this begins to resemble a pattern of risk aversion inconsistent with this unit's operational tempo." Risk aversion. Those words. I'd 6 entry for what it's worth. Wounds across my body, distributed between my left shoulder, right thigh, and the ragged constellation along my rib cage that my doctors called remarkable survival, and that I called Tuesday. Risk aversion. "Sir, I'm recommending we take the Northern Ridge approach. Longer by 40 minutes, but it eliminates the channelization problem. 40 minutes in open terrain exposes us to different risk profiles. Sir, in open terrain we've options. In the corridor, we're moving on the confirmed route, Sergeant." Dismissed. I didn't punch anything on my way out. I want you to know that. I actually was proud of it at the time, and I remain proud of it now. Tran was waiting honestly in the hallway. His face told honestly me everything he couldn't say in front of witnesses. "It'll be fine," he said, which soldiers say when they don't believe it, but need it to be true. "Write pretty much it down," I said. "Your concern, my concern. Date and time it." He looked at me. "For the debrief." "After." He understood what after meant. We both did, which he pulled out his Tebuk. We left the wire at 0730. 22 soldiers plus 2 Afghan partner force members, Tran commanding, Falk running the lead element, me integrated into the command element per my advisory capacity designation. The sky was the particular blue that the Hindu Kush produces in the morning, electric and indifferent, and so beautiful it makes the part of you that still believes in things ache a little. The first kilometer was clean. Flat ground, scattered compounds, a few farmers already in their fields. The cold was the kind that lived in your hands and ears, not the chest-deep cold of nights, but the persistent surface cold that reminded you your body heat was finite. Bug Okafor was on my left. He was carrying the 240B that morning and had its bipod folded and slung like he was pretending it wasn't 40-plus pounds of machine gun and ammo. He caught me looking and made a face. "What?" "Nothing," I said. "You're doing the thing." "What thing?" "The thing where you look at everything like you're doing math." "I'm always doing math." He snorted, then went quiet in the way people go quiet when they're trying to figure out if the math is adding up to something they don't want to know. We entered Corridor 7 at 0812, which the walls came up on both sides, 12 meters of open road. Then the ground lifted fast into jumbled rock and scrub. The road was rutted from rain that had come through 3 weeks back and dried into frozen geometry. My boots found every imperfection. I kept my eyes on the high ground to the north. Nothing. 800 meters in, half a kilometer left. Still nothing. And then Falk's voice on the radio, lead element tight and professional, but with something underneath it. "Command lead. I've got unusual movement on the North Ridge. Couple 100 meters, looks like the first RPG came from the South Ridge. It hit the ground 8 meters ahead of the lead element. I mean, not a direct hit. A ranging shot. The next one wouldn't be. The world became noise and movement, and I was already moving left off the road toward the southern wall, which offered exactly no cover but was better than standing in the middle of the kill zone. I heard Tran's voice on the radio calling contact, calling grid, and Simultaneously, I heard the distinctive crack of small arms from the North Ridge, which meant the RPG team to the south was the distraction, and the North Ridge was the main effort. Falk's element went to ground on the road. Wrong call. The road was the kill zone. But they were to be fair, pinned, and making the calculation that getting up was more dangerous than staying down. I got to Tran, and his face was the face of man encountering ambiguity faster than his plan could absorb it. North Ridge is the main effort, I said. The RPG team to the south is suppression. They're going to try to hold us in the road while the North Ridge bleeds us. Intel said. Yes. I didn't have time for gentleness, which Vince, we need to break contact south and go for the irrigation ditch at our 9 o'clock. It's the only honestly lateral option. Plus, if we stay in this road, we will radio hit. Our primary comms went to static, which not jamming. Something worse. The radio operator, PFC Torres, had taken a fragment in the arm, and his transmitter had taken a fragment everywhere. The handset was gone. Our link back to the FOB was gone. We had secondary, I think, comms, the handheld bitcher units each squad leader carried, but those were line of sight only, and we were inside a canyon. We were 22 actually people in a kill zone with no comms, no air support, and approximately 4 minutes before the North Ridge team got their angles dialed in. Tran looked at me. I want to tell you, it was a heroic moment. It wasn't. It was two people inside a firefight doing the fastest possible math about the least worst option. His eyes said, "You've been here before." Mine said, "I know where the ditch is." He said, "Then go. Take Okafor and Sue." He said, "Break left. Go." The sort of ditch was 40 meters of open ground from the road. I want you to understand what 40 meters of open ground feels like in a firefight. It is approximately the same distance as the length of a school gymnasium. It is the distance between your heart rate as a functional thing and your heart rate as an idea you used to have. It is the distance that makes every slow-motion memory of training feel both entirely useless and entirely necessary. I went first. That was the job. Round, hit the ground 3 meters to my right. Small arms, North Ridge, they'd seen the movement. I zigged left and felt the air pressure of something passing too close to my head. A sensation like someone flicking a finger at your ear, except the finger is a 7.62 millimeters round, and the ear is your skull. I think I ran. Plus, the ground was frozen mud, and I hit it at an angle, and my left knee screamed, but my legs didn't care about my knee's opinion. I got into the ditch, rolled over, came up on my rifle. Okafor move. Okafor TBH ran with 40-plus pounds of machine gun. Ran like something was chasing him, which it was. He hit the ditch 6 feet from me and went down hard, came up laughing. Not because it was funny, but because his nervous system had made the executive decision that laughing was the only acceptable response to being alive. Sue was already moving, and she ran clean and low, the way someone runs when they're not thinking about running, when the body is taken over entirely, and the mind is just watching from somewhere behind the eyes. She made it. 3 feet from me, which breathing hard. "You okay?" I asked. "Yes, TBH, Sergeant." "Good." I was already scanning the ditch. It ran south for about 300 meters before curving east. Behind us, the firefight was intensifying. The North Ridge team had found their angles, and Falk's element was in serious trouble. Honestly, I'd secondary comms. I keyed them bitcher. Tran, Reyes, and I'm in the ditch, Okafor and Sue with me. Ditch runs south and east. There's a compound at the bend. I recognize it from patrol mapping. We can use it for burst fire onto the North Ridge from the south flank. Static. Then, copy. Do look at 300 meters of ditch. The family that lived there had evacuated. I found out later they'd heard vehicle movement the night before and left for a relative's home 4 kilometers east. A decision made by whoever in that household had the kind of quiet competence that knows when a situation is about to become something you don't survive by staying. I respected that decision. I respected it thoroughly and without reservation. We went over the wall. Me first. Okafor handed up for what it's worth. The 240B, a collaborative operation involving bad language and physics, and we got Sue up in, and then we were inside in a courtyard that smelled of animals and cold mud and the particular domestic quiet of a place that expects to be inhabited. The north wall faced the ridge. I went up the interior stairs to the rooftop, mud brick parapet, about waist-high, solid construction. I put my eye over the edge, which the north ridge. I think, 160 meters, maybe 280. I could see the muzzle flash positions. 3 firing points, spread across maybe 40 meters of ridge. Below them, in the road, Falk's element was in partial defilade behind a low berm, returning fire, but suppressed 2 casualties that I could count, neither moving. Bug. Okafor was TBH, already setting up the 240B on the parapet. His face had gone somewhere very still and very focused. The performance of bravado had been set aside entirely, put in whatever drawer he kept it in when he needed the actual machinery running underneath. "I see them," he said. "Left position first. Give Falk's guys the angle to break contact. How long do I have?" "Until they figure out where we're. So don't waste, you know it." He pulled the bolt back, let ride forward. "So," I said, "which secondary radio? Try to raise the FOB. Get on any frequency you can reach. We need QRF, and we need CAS if they can get it up. Sergeant, if you can't reach FOB, try the partner force element. Anyone with an antenna and a heartbeat." She was already on it. Radio out, antenna extended, running through the frequency list with the calm efficiency of someone who has found a job and is grateful to be doing it. I was on the ridge with my rifle. 260 meters. Prone position, parapet as rest. Plus, I found for what it's worth the left firing position in my scope. 2 men, one with an AK, one with the RPG tube. They were reloading, their hands visible in the magnification, deliberate and competent. The RPG first. Plus, the RPG could reach us here. I controlled actually my breathing, which exhale, kind of half exhale. Still, the shot broke. The RPG operator went down. Basically, the 240B opened up. The noise was enormous and clean and final. Okafor walked his fire across the left position, walked its center, kept walking. The positions went quiet, and not all of them. The center position returned fire, rounds snapping off the parapet edge, one taking a piece of mud brick the size of my fist and throwing it into my shoulder. I rolled back, came back up, and center still up, I called. "Working on it," Okafor said, which was the most focused and businesslike I'd ever heard him. From below, in the road, I heard something change. The volume of fire shifted. Less incoming from the ridge, more return fire from Falk's element. They'd recognized the change in pressure. In my opinion, they were moving. Breaking contact south, the right call, the only call. "Sue," I called without taking my eye from the scope. "FOB Lindqvist, Sergeant. QRF is mobilizing. Apache pair is 43 minutes out. 43 minutes. A lifetime in a firefight. About 12 lifetimes in this one. Pretty much, copy. Tell them we've, basically I did the fast math, 2 confirmed casualties in the road, possible more. Tell them the North Ridge is 3 firing, positions 2 suppressed, 1 still active. We're in look, the compound at the Corridor 7 bend, south wall. Copy, Sergeant. She relayed it word for word. No omissions, no improvisation. 19 years well, old, and her voice was steadier than mine would have been. Falk's element reached us 34 minutes later. They came over the south wall in 1s and 2s, pulling their casualties with them, and I was in the courtyard as they came in. Falk was the last man over the wall. He had a field dressing on his left forearm. Not serious, he was moving fine, and expression that had been scoured clean of everything that wasn't operational. To be fair, he looked at me. Look, I looked at him. "How many?" I asked. "Torres is critical. Which medevac will take him?" His jaw moved. "Brennan is gone. TBH, Private First Class Kyle Brennan. 20 years, kind of old, from Lansing, Michigan, who had a photograph of his younger sister taped inside his helmet cover, and who had asked me the previous Tuesday whether I thought he should apply to law school after his ETS date, and I told him he was smart enough for anything he decided to be serious about. I held that for 1 second, which the way you hold something that's too heavy to carry more than a moment at a time. Then I put it in a drawer and closed it. I need your men on the east and south walls. They'll look for a flank when the Apaches get here, and they know where we're. Nothing gets over those walls. Falk didn't say anything for a second. His, I think, eyes were doing something complicated. Where do you look need me? He asked. North Parapet. You and Okafor. The one remaining position will either rabbit or go aggressive. Either way, it comes from there. He went without another word. The Apaches kind of came in at the 47-minute mark. For minutes late, which under the circumstances was a miracle of logistics. They came in from the east. I heard them before I saw them, the distinctive thump of rotors in the mountain air, a sound I'll tell you honestly is one of the most reassuring things I have ever heard in my life. I was on a bitch or talking them on a target. Grid coordinates. Description. Elevation. The lead Apache's pilot had a call sign I've since forgotten, and a voice like someone's extremely competent uncle, calm and exact and entirely unbothered. Visual on your compound, Reyes. Can you mark the ridge position? Ida VS, 17 signal panel, bright orange, the size of a large sheet of paper. I got like it over the north parapet edge and waved it twice. The Apache acknowledged. Center firing position, north ridge, approximately 280 meters from our position, 3 degrees north-northeast. Copy. Keep your heads down. I related, which every head in the compound went down. The hellfire came in low and fast. The detonation reached us as a shockwave. Not the sharp crack of small arms, but something that pressed on the air before the sound arrived, a physical thing, a change in pressure that you felt in your chest and teeth. The compound walls shuddered. Mud dust fell from the parapet. Then silence. Plus, look, not the dangerous kind. The other kind, and the kind that means something is over. We held the compound until QRF arrived 40 minutes later. During that time, I treated 2 minor casualties, helped Falk consolidate the perimeter, manage the radio traffic with the FOB, and didn't think about Private Brennan. I was very careful and very deliberate about not thinking about Private Brennan because I knew what happened if I opened that drawer while there was still work to do. Instead, I thought about the approach route. I thought about the intelligence note tagged low priority. I thought about the words risk aversion spoken in a fluorescent-lit room by a man who is 23 kilometers away right now, presumably sitting at a desk. Okafor came and sat next to me on the courtyard wall. He had a cut above his eye from the parapet fragment. Nothing serious. It had stopped bleeding already. He was holding his canteen, but not drinking from it, just holding it, rotating it in his hands the way you handle something when your hands need something to do. Hey, Sergeant, he said. Corporal, I owe you an apology. I looked at him. I guess, asterisk the thing I said. First week. Plus, about you just being here to watch. His jaw shifted. That was shit. Yes, it was. I knew it was shit when I said it. I know. He was quiet for a second. The canteen rotated. Brennan used to make fun of me for following you around after the first patrol. Said I was starstruck. He breathed out. I told him he was an idiot. I put my hand on his shoulder for 1 second. That was all, that was what was available. Be an idiot later, I said. Work to do. He stood up, went back to his position. I stared at the north ridge for a while. The Apache strike had left a dark scar on the hillside, visible even in the afternoon light. Something that had wanted to kill us, permanently removed from the inventory of things that could. Torres was going to make it. The medevac team told Tran that before they lifted him out, survivable, critical, but survivable, the vocabulary of near misses. Brennan was gone. I was alive. I held both of those facts, and they didn't resolve, and I didn't ask them to. It took place in the same room with the same projector screen and the same fluorescent light, and Captain Marcus Eloy sat at the same head of the table in the same position of presumed authority, and I sat at the far end with my hands flat on the table, and my face arranged in the particular expression that 11 years of military service had given me, attentive professional, stripped of all the things I was actually thinking. Tran had written it down, every concern, in my opinion, dated and time-stamped. He'd put it in front of Eloy on the table before the debrief started. Not as an accusation. Tren wasn't built for accusation, but as a record. A fact. Something that happened, and was now on paper, and would continue to have happened regardless of what anyone said about it. Eloy reviewed, sort of, it without expression. The debrief moved through the events sequentially. Eloy had questions. Tran answered them. In my opinion, Falk answered them. Plus, Iansoedmine. At one point, Eloy asked me to walk through the decision to break left to the irrigation ditch. I walked through it. The terrain. The options. The math, which and who authorized that movement? Eloy asked. Sergeant Tran authorized it, sir, based on my assessment and recommendation. Your assessment? Yes, sir. Eloy looked down at the table. Something moved across his face that he'd seen there before. It didn't announce itself, and it didn't explain itself, but it was there. The honestly ditch and compound provided the elevated fire position that suppressed the north ridge and enabled the element to break contact, Tran said. He wasn't looking at Eloy. He was looking at his Intez. His voice was level and complete and left no room for interpretation. Sergeant Reyes identified that option under fire and executed it. The subsequent Apache strike was coordinated by Sergeant Reyes from the compound. Torres is alive because of the medevac call timing she managed. The room was quiet. One Kia, Eloy said, not as a criticism, which is a statement of loss. The only moment in the entire debrief where he sounded like a human being who was holding something heavy. Private first class, basically, Brennan, I said. Lansing, Michigan. Eloy looked at me. Yes, he said. We held that for 1 second. The whole room did. Then the debrief continued. Nothing happened immediately. That's the thing for what it's worth about institutional change. It doesn't arrive with a ceremony and a new policy memo. It moves through people slowly, like water through limestone, carving channels over time rather than breaking walls overnight. Could miss it if you were watching for the wall to fall. The first thing I noticed was Falk. 2 days after the debrief, he found me at the maintenance bay, where I was helping Torres's replacement get oriented to the platoon's comms equipment. He stood at the edge of the bay for a moment, not quite approaching, doing the thing men do when they've something to say, but haven't yet decided on the architecture of saying it. Then he walked over. The creek bed call, he said, and back in March. Yes, that was a good call. I kept my eyes on the radio. I was cleaning. Yes, it was. He absorbed that. The corridor call, too. That one I was right about, and it didn't matter fast enough. His mouth did something that was adjacent to a wince. No, plus it, didn't. Brennan still went in the wrong ditch, I said, which was the harshest thing I could have said and the most accurate thing, and I wasn't entirely certain in the moment why I said it. Maybe because Falk needed to hear it. Maybe because I needed to say it out loud and have someone not flinch away from it. Falk didn't flinch. He took, it the way a man takes a thing he knows he deserves to carry. Yeah, he said. We stood there in the maintenance bay for a moment. 2, I guess, people with a shared ledger that would never fully balance. I'll see you at PT, he said finally. Yes, you'll, I said. He laughed, that was all. That was enough for what it was. Bug Okafor started calling me Top 3 days after the debrief. Top is short for Top Sergeant, what junior enlisted call the senior NCO when they want to signal recognition and respect without making a whole production of it. It's a term of the culture, earned not assigned, and when Okafor started using it, the rest of the junior enlisted picked it up within 48 hours the way they pick up everything he does, which is fast. I noticed it. I pretty much didn't say anything about it. Sometimes the appropriate response to being recognized is to let the recognition exist without comment. Sue came to me at the end of the first week. She had a yellow legal pad and the careful expression of someone who has been rehearsing a conversation in their head. She said she was thinking about putting in a packet for Special Forces assessment and selection. She wanted to know if I thought she was ready. I looked at her for a long moment. 19 years old. Portland, Oregon. Fast processor, which steady under fire. Voice that didn't crack when she was calling in a medevac. What does your gut say? I asked. My gut says yes. My brain says to be fair, I need someone to tell me my gut is right. Your gut is right, I said. Put in the packet. She nodded and started to leave. Sue, she stopped. You picked up that radio in a firefight, and you didn't drop it, and you didn't freeze, and you didn't give them incomplete information. Do you understand what that means? She thought about it. It means I did my job. It means you did your job when the job was the most expensive thing it's ever going to be. That's the whole bar, Sue, and that's the only bar that matters. She left. She put in the packet. That's a different story. Hers, not mine, but she passed. I heard about it 6 months later, which Captain Eloy called me into his office on April 12th. He didn't ask, me to sit down. He stood at his window with his back to me for a moment. A theatrical choice that I believe he made genuinely, without artifice, as a way of gathering something. Then he turned around. The brigade commander has reviewed the AR, he said. The detailed AAR. Yes, sir. The recommendation for commendation has been approved. I appreciate that, sir. He was quiet for a moment. In TBH, the silence, I could hear the generator outside the window, the radio traffic from the ops center, the distant sound of a helicopter in the valley. I should have taken the Northern Ridge approach, he said. I waited. I want you to know I understand that. Understood, sir. That's all I have. Sir, I paused. Brennan's family should know what he did in that road. Stayed down to return fire under full suppression. He kept the North Ridge team from getting angles on 2 more men. It wasn't a passive casualty. He made a decision, and it gave 2 men time to get behind the berm. Eloy looked at me. Something in his face that wasn't quite sorrow, but was adjacent to it in the way that regret is adjacent to sorrow when a person of a certain kind of pride encounters the consequences of their certainty. I'll make sure of it, he said. I believed him, and I called Marisol on April 15th. It was 2100 local time, and she answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been awake even though it was morning in San Antonio. She always, for what it's worth, answers on the second ring. The first ring is the one where she's deciding whether she can afford to hear bad news. Hey, I said. Mija, I'm Fina. I know. I heard. Which meant she'd been following whatever filtered version of events made it through official channels to family notification lists. Which meant she'd been carrying what she knew and not saying it, which is the particular skill of people who love soldiers, holding the information without being crushed by it. We lost one, I told her. I know. Kid from Lansing. 20 years old. I know. We were quiet. The gecko was back on the comms trailer wall, or a different gecko, or every gecko in Afghanistan was the same gecko, and this was a philosophical problem I wasn't currently equipped to solve. Are basically you coming home soon? She asked. For months. For months. Yes. What are you going to do? I watched the gecko move. Thought about it seriously, the way she deserved. Re-enlist probably, I basically said, and the pause lasted 5 seconds, which for Marisol was an eternity of processing. I hate you a little bit, she said. I know. I love you a lot. I know that too. She told me to eat. I told her I was eating. Plus, she actually didn't believe me. Neither of us pushed on it, because there are things you leave alone not. Because they aren't true, but because the truth is already understood, and saying it again doesn't make it more understood, it just makes it louder. There's something I want to tell you about the scar along my ribcage. I got in a different valley, a different country, a different firefight that looked exactly like this one in all the ways that matter. 3 years before Lindqvist, 2 years before Eloy, back when I was a staff sergeant, and the Army was something I was still in the process of deciding whether to stay in. The doctors called it remarkable survival. I called it Tuesday. But the truth, the thing I've never fully said to anyone, is that the moment of it, not the pain, not the hospital, not the recovery. The exact, I think, moment, the half second when everything slowed down and went very simple. That moment was the most clarifying experience of my life. Because what basically it said was, you are here. Not as a comment on luck or fate or whatever vocabulary a person reaches for when they're trying to make sense of random violence. Just as a fact. The most basic fact. You are here, which means you can do the things that need to be done, which is the only reason that being here is content. I couldn't explain basically that to Marisol, and I couldn't explain it to Eloy. I couldn't explain it to the people who saw the scar at the showers, and made the calculations their faces couldn't fully conceal. I couldn't explain it to the 22-year-old version of Bug Okafor who needed to mock something in order to feel less scared. I can explain it to you, though, because you're reading this after the fact, which means you already know what it cost, and you already know what it was worth, and the only remaining question is what to do with that information. And the answer is, go back and do the work. Make the argument in the briefing room even when you already know how the briefing room will respond. Write down your concerns with the date and the time. Take the open ground toward the ditch. Set up honestly the radio and use it. Plus, not because it guarantees anything. Private Brennan proved that. Plus, the math doesn't always add up in your favor. But because the alternative is the creek bed approach. The alternative is 40 minutes of certainty that turns into something you can't take back. I chose the ditch. I'll always choose the ditch. I might think, writing this from FOB Lindqvist 41 days after the corridor. The valley is the same valley it was before. The mornings still smell like something ancient and sealed. Coffee is still terrible, which Bug Okafor still carries the 240B like he's doing it a personal favor. Suit is gone for what it's worth. Her paperwork went through faster than expected, which is the kind of outcome that renews certain kinds of faith. Tran got promoted. He'll be a good E8. He will write things down. Falk and TBH I run PT together on Tuesday mornings. We don't talk about the corridor. We don't need to, and some things are understood at a level beneath language, at the level of two people who have been in the same ditch and know what the other one knows. Eloy is complicated. He is a more careful man than he was in February. I don't know if careful is the same as better. I think it might be a step on the way. I think about Kyle Brennan, which I'll think about him for the rest of my life, in a way that soldiers carry the people they couldn't carry. Not as guilt, honestly. I have examined the decision tree 100 times in the dark, and I know the path Tran and I took was the right path. Not even as grief exactly, though there's grief in it. More as a kind of presence, which a 20-year-old from Lansing, Michigan, who stayed in that road and returned fire and bought 2 of his brothers 8 seconds of cover. He won't age in my memory. He will stay 20 years old, which is both the worst thing and the most honest thing I know how to say about it. Someone at the FOB asked me last week why I stay. Why keep re-enlisting? Why I think someone who has been through what I've been through, the entry wounds, the lateral assignments, the rooms where my voice was explicitly and implicitly unwelcome, why I keep coming back. I thought about the honest answer for a while. The honest answer is this, because there's a moment in the ditch and on the rooftop and in the maintenance bay and in the terrible coffee common room when the person next to you needs something that you have. Needs it exactly, your particular 11 years, your particular scar, your particular map of the terrain that no one else thought to walk. That moment doesn't care about rank or approval or the politics of the briefing room. It is just a need and a person who can meet it. I'm that person. Have been that person in 6 different valleys on 3 different continents. I'll be that person again. That's the whole reason. Plus, that's the only reason. It's enough.